I was standing barefoot on wet concrete when it happened. Chlorine burned the back of my throat, sharp and metallic. The pool lights buzzed overhead, flat and unforgiving. 40 recruits lined the deck in silence, arms locked, eyes forward, bodies rigid with the kind of fear that keeps you breathing shallow. The instructor didn't raise his voice at first. He stepped closer, water dripping from his sleeves, calm, like this was a lesson he'd taught 100 times. "You think I don't see him struggling," he said, nodding toward the water. "I do. I just don't flinch." His eyes stayed on mine. "Out there, nobody pauses because your lungs burn. You want to write the letter to his mother when he freezes in a kill zone, because I won't. I break them here so they don't die there." Then he bent down, scooped water with both hands, and threw it into my face. Cold ran into my eyes and mouth, soaked my shirt, slid down my neck. No one laughed. No one moved. I wiped my eyes once. "Corpsman, get that recruit on oxygen." "Now," I said. "Instructor, secure the pool." Boots hesitated. Then moved. He leaned in, chlorine heavy on his breath. "Get off my deck," he whispered, "before you drown on dry land." I reached into my pocket and handed him my identification. That was the moment everything stopped breathing. Subscribe to my channel, Hidden Sniper Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Nothing about that morning was accidental. I did not wander onto that pool deck out of curiosity, and I did not stay quiet because I was unsure of myself. I was there because someone had finally decided that the things people whispered about that place needed to be seen without ceremony or warning. My name is Lieutenant Claire Morgan, United States Army. In the year 2014, I was pulled from an operational billet and reassigned to a joint combat training facility outside a small base near Redwood Crossing, Kentucky. It was not a place anyone bragged about. No famous name. No legacy stories told over beers. Just low concrete buildings, tree lines pressed tight against the perimeter, and humidity that settled into your bones before sunrise. On paper, my role was clean and harmless. Standards and safety oversight. Observe training. Identify risk. Recommend corrections. The kind of assignment people assume is administrative, something you do between real jobs. In reality, it made me unwelcome the moment I arrived. Nobody likes an observer. Nobody likes someone whose job is to notice the things others have learned to ignore. And they like it even less when that observer is a woman in her early 30s walking into a male-dominated training pipeline that prides itself on being unforgiving. The facility had a reputation long before I stepped through the gate. Old school, no excuses. Hard on purpose. People spoke about it with a mix of pride and fear. Graduates wore the experience like a scar they believed proved something important. I had heard that language before, usually right before someone got hurt. So I made a choice early. I did not announce myself. I did not check in with instructors. I did not flash rank or credentials. I wanted truth, not a performance staged for an audience. I wanted to see how things ran when people believed they were untouchable. That morning, I arrived early, before most of the staff. The concrete was still damp from cleaning, air thick and warm even that early. I wore plain physical training clothes, faded and unremarkable. No rank on my chest, no name tape. Nothing that marked me as authority, just another body near the pool. I stood off to the side and watched. The recruits filed in quietly, moving with the stiffness of people who knew every mistake would be remembered. They were young, strong, and tense. You could see it in the way their shoulders sat too high, the way they avoided eye contact, the way their breathing changed when instructors passed behind them. The drill was introduced as routine, water confidence, controlled stress, building calm under pressure. What I saw did not match the words. Recovery time between repetitions was cut short. Mistakes were punished immediately instead of corrected. Commands came sharp and fast, less about instruction and more about dominance. Fear was not a side effect, it was the tool. I watched faces tighten. I watched hands shake before submersion. I watched recruits swallow panic because they believed panic meant failure. One instructor controlled the deck more than the others. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't sloppy. He moved with certainty, voice even, posture confident. He watched every detail. He did not look like someone enjoying cruelty. He looked like someone convinced. That mattered. Men like that are more dangerous than bullies. They do not think they are wrong. They think they are saving lives. I stayed quiet longer than most people would have. I tracked breathing patterns. I watched how bodies responded over time, not just on one pass. I listened to the tone of commands, the lack of adjustment when conditions changed. One recruit began to separate from the rest. At first, it was barely noticeable. A half-second delay before pushing off the wall. A kick that landed just out of rhythm. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would show up clearly on paper. Then his coordination slipped. His legs scissored instead of driving. His hands scraped along the tile instead of gripping it cleanly. When he surfaced, his breath came too fast, chest rising shallow and high instead of deep. I had seen those signs before. In swimmers. In divers. In people seconds away from losing consciousness. I waited for the instructor to notice. He didn't. Instead, the pace increased. Commands sharpened. The recruit was ordered under again with less recovery than before. That was when I stepped closer. I did not interrupt the drill. I did not raise my voice. I positioned myself so the instructor could hear me without the recruits hearing a word. I kept my tone professional, calm, the way you speak when you care about outcomes more than appearances. He needs a pause, I said. Breathing's off. He didn't turn his head. Again, he called out. The recruit pushed off. The deck went quiet in the way people get when they sense something is wrong and know they are not allowed to acknowledge it. The only sounds were water slapping concrete and the harsh pull of air into lungs already pushed too far. My stomach tightened. This was no longer stress. This was danger. I spoke again, firmer now. Clear. Controlled. That was when he finally turned toward me. "You don't understand what keeps people alive," he said, voice steady, not angry. "Comfort kills. Fear doesn't." As he spoke, the recruit pushed off the wall again. His body sank instead of cutting forward. In that moment, watching his legs go loose and his arms lose purpose, I understood exactly why I had been sent there. Not to observe, not to recommend, but to decide whether silence was going to win again. On paper, the drill was clean and defensible. Underwater crossings, timed submersions, calm exits at the wall. The kind of evolution that looks disciplined in a briefing room and earns nods from people who are not close enough to smell panic on wet concrete. On the deck, it felt wrong. Recruits were being sent under again and again with barely enough time to reset their breathing. Faces tightened, jaws locked. Eyes fixed forward in that empty stare that means the body has stopped learning and started surviving. The instructors called it conditioning. I recognized it as overload. The same recruit kept drifting into my focus. At first it was subtle, a delay before the push. A kick that landed late, nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point at and say, "Stop," with confidence. Then his rhythm broke. His legs scissored instead of driving. His hands reached for the wall and scraped along the tile, fingers sliding where they should have locked. When he surfaced, his breathing came fast and shallow, chest lifting high instead of deep. He blinked hard, like the world wasn't lining up the way it should. I stepped closer to the edge of the pool and spoke quietly, keeping my voice low enough that only the lead instructor could hear. "His breathing's off," I said. "He needs a pause." He didn't turn. Again, he called out. Louder, sharper, sharper. Leg volume could push oxygen back into a body that was already running out. The deck went still. Not calm, frozen. 40 recruits staring straight ahead, hearing everything and pretending they weren't. Water slapped against concrete. Someone coughed. The air smelled sharp and metallic. My stomach tightened. I spoke again, firmer now. "He's losing coordination. Stop the drill." That was enough to get his attention. He turned toward me slowly, eyes steady, expression controlled. Not angry. Certain. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they believe they've already solved. "You think I don't see it?" he said. "I do." I didn't answer. He nodded toward the recruit clinging to the wall. "You see panic." "I see someone who might freeze when it matters." His voice stayed calm, almost instructional. "Out there, no one pauses because your lungs burn." He stepped closer. Chlorine hung heavy on his breath. "You want to write the letter to his mother when he locks up in a kill zone?" "Because I won't." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "I'd break them here so they don't die there." There was no cruelty in his tone. That was the part that made it dangerous. He believed this was mercy. He believed fear now prevented death later. As he finished speaking, the recruit pushed off the wall again. I watched his body sink instead of cutting forward, watched his legs go loose, kick turning sloppy and uncoordinated. His arms moved without purpose, hands dragging through the water like they no longer knew what they were for. He didn't turn. He didn't surface. For a moment, no one moved. The instructor was still standing there, conviction intact, waiting for proof that he was right. Then the water went still in a way it should not. There is a moment when rank, protocol, and consequence fall away completely. It is not panic. It is clarity. Everything unnecessary disappears, and only one truth remains. Someone is about to die. I didn't ask permission. I didn't look for approval. I stepped off the deck and went into the water fully clothed. The cold hit hard, biting through muscle, but it didn't slow me. I reached the recruit in 2 strokes and wrapped an arm under his chest. His body was heavy in a way living bodies should not be. I kicked hard and hauled him upward, turning his face toward air as we broke the surface. His lungs spasmed. He coughed violently, chest jerking as air rushed back in uneven bursts. I pushed him toward the edge where hands reached down and pulled him out. He lay on the concrete gasping, eyes unfocused, alive. The pool went silent. No shouting. No commands. Just the sound of a young man dragging oxygen back into his body and realizing how close he had come to never doing that again. I climbed out, clothes heavy, heart pounding. Water ran off my sleeves and pooled at my feet. I looked at the instructor, waiting for something that resembled understanding. What I saw instead was anger. Not fear, not concern. Anger that his certainty had been challenged. Anger that he had been proven wrong in front of witnesses. He stepped toward me, boots slapping wet concrete. "You just interfered with training," he said. "You don't jump into my drill." I stayed where I was, eyes on the recruit, making sure the shaking was slowing, that breath was turning steady. The instructor leaned in close, voice low. "Get off my deck," he whispered, "before you drown on dry land." Saving the recruit had ended the drill. It had also made me the problem. Standing there soaked and breathing hard, I understood something with perfect clarity. Stepping into the water had been the easy decision. What came next would cost far more than wet clothes. I got him out of the water before his lungs filled completely. There was no rush of adrenaline, no sense of heroics. Just training taking over. Hands where they needed to be. Leverage instead of strength. I turned his face toward air and felt his body jerk as breath came back in hard, uneven pulls. I pushed him toward the deck, and other hands reached down and hauled him clear. He lay there coughing, chest heaving, eyes unfocused but alive. That should have ended it. The instructor never looked at the recruit. Not once. His eyes stayed on me, locked and burning, like the only mistake that mattered was that I had stepped in. He walked toward me, boots slapping against wet concrete, not rushed. Controlled. His voice stayed low, measured. "You don't jump into my drill," he said. "You don't touch my recruit." The recruits froze, eyes forward, pretending they were statues instead of witnesses. Fear had trained them well. I stayed kneeling for a second, watching the recruits breathing slow, just enough to steady. When I stood, water ran off my sleeves and pooled at my feet. The instructor stepped closer. Chlorine and sweat hung on his breath. "You think you saved him," he said. "You didn't. You delayed the lesson." He gestured toward the pool without looking away from me. "Out there, nobody stops because you're scared. Nobody pauses because your lungs burn. If I don't push them past comfort here, they freeze when it matters." His voice never rose. That was what made it worse. "You want to write the letter to his mother when that happens," he continued. "Because I won't." There was no cruelty in it. Only certainty. "I break them here," he said quietly, "so they don't die there." Then he bent down, scooped water from the pool with both hands, and threw it into my face. Cold slammed into my eyes and mouth, ran down my neck, soaked my shirt. The deck went silent. No laughter, no gasps. Just the hum of the lights and the sound of water dripping onto concrete. I wiped my eyes once. "Corpsman," I said evenly, "get him on oxygen." The corpsman moved immediately. I turned slightly and pointed down the deck. "Secure the pool. Drill is over." For a moment, no one moved. Then boots shifted. One instructor stepped away from the edge. Another followed. The pool began to clear. The man stared at me, confusion cutting through his anger. He leaned in close, voice dropping. "Get off my deck," he whispered, "before you drown on dry land." I met his eyes. Dome, flat, flat. "Stand down," I said. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Or what?" I reached into my pocket and handed him my identification. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough. He read it. The change in his face was immediate. Color draining. Jaw tightening. His eyes flicked past me, suddenly aware of the recruits, the instructors, the witnesses who had just watched him cross a line he could not step back over. He handed the card back without meeting my eyes. No one spoke. The recruit coughed again, weaker now, steadier. Authority hadn't shifted because of a piece of plastic. It had shifted because the room had already obeyed before he understood why. I took my identification back and said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. Medical support arrived. The recruit was lifted and carried away. Instructors dismissed the formation one by one, voices tight and controlled. I stood there soaked, heart still pounding, knowing one thing for certain. I had not come there to challenge belief. But once belief puts a life at risk, it stops being doctrine and becomes negligence. And now that line had been crossed in front of everyone. The pool deck emptied fast, but not with relief. Recruits were dismissed in clipped, controlled voices, boots moving in straight lines, eyes fixed ahead. No one looked back. The doors closed behind them one by one, each click sealing the moment in place. Once the witnesses were gone, the room changed. Command staff arrived within minutes. Calm. Professional. Too calm. Questions came in low voices, not about the recruit's condition, but about sequence and authority. Who said what? Who acted first? Who stepped out of line? I answered plainly. I described the breathing pattern, the loss of coordination, the refusal to pause the drill, the moment the recruit failed to surface. I explained why I entered the water and what would have happened if I had not. I did not raise my voice. I did not soften a single detail. The instructor stood rigid with his hands behind his back. When he spoke, his tone was steady, almost rehearsed. "This training saves lives," he said. "If we go easy here, they die later." He didn't deny the risk. He justified it. Some instructors avoided eye contact completely. Others watched me with careful attention, weighing me, deciding whether I was dangerous or temporary. I could feel the room calculating how long I might last. "I'm not here to destroy careers," I said. "I'm here to stop preventable deaths." That sentence landed hard because it forced a choice. Either this was an isolated incident or it was part of something larger. Either the system corrected itself or it protected behavior that would eventually put someone in the ground. That clarity did not make me welcome, especially not with senior enlisted leadership who had built their authority on silence and fear. Men who believed suffering was proof of readiness. Men who had survived that system and decided survival meant it must be right. They didn't confront me directly. They slowed everything down. I asked for medical logs. I was told they were being reviewed. I asked for training incident reports. I was handed summaries with sections missing. I requested transfer records and was told they had been archived. In one office, a clerk slid a folder across the desk without meeting my eyes. It felt light. Too light. Half the pages were gone. "That's all there is," he said quietly. It wasn't. I started matching what I could get, training dates against medical notes. Transfers approved days after hypoxia symptoms were documented. Recruits removed from the pipeline and labeled unfit instead of injured. The language repeated itself. Lack of mental toughness, failure to adapt, did not meet standards. Underneath that language were clinical notes that told a different story. Oxygen deprivation, loss of motor control, near drowning. One file could be dismissed. Two might be coincidence. A pattern could not. I spoke to medical staff in hallways and half-closed offices. They didn't argue. They didn't defend the system. They just described how recommendations were ignored and concerns were waved off when they conflicted with schedules. I spoke to junior instructors who lowered their voices without realizing it. Some defended the training out of habit. Others admitted they had seen things go too far and learned when to stay quiet. Fear had trained them too. By the end of the day, I stopped thinking about one instructor or one drill. This was bigger than that. This was a culture that rewarded silence and punished interruption. A culture that believed belief mattered more than evidence. I documented everything. Dates, gaps, resistance. Because once you see a pattern clearly, you lose the option of pretending it isn't there. And the people who benefited from the old way understood that before anyone else. They were already deciding how to deal with me. The pressure didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly, wrapped in professionalism, disguised as concern. Meetings were scheduled that didn't need to happen. Questions were asked that had already been answered. My judgment was reviewed, then reviewed again, each time framed a little differently. Words like liability and risk started showing up in conversations that had nothing to do with safety. My decisions were described as emotional, my actions as impulsive. No one accused me directly of being wrong. They didn't need to. The implication did the work. Then my qualifications came up. Courses I had completed without question in other commands were suddenly described as situational. Experience that had once been considered an asset was now discussed like a limitation. A senior officer smiled politely and said, "We just want to make sure you're still current." A few days later, the evaluation appeared on the schedule. It was a physical assessment course that hadn't been required for my billet. Not recently, not officially. But there it was, added quietly. Observers listed, no explanation attached. It was framed as routine, but everyone understood what it was meant to do. If I failed, the story would write itself. If I quit, it would be worse. So I trained, not publicly, not dramatically. I trained early when the facility was quiet and the air was still cool. I focused on pacing, breath control, and decision-making under fatigue, not to dominate the course, to survive it clean. The morning of the evaluation, the water was cold enough to bite. It stole heat fast, crawling up my legs, stiffening joints, turning movement into effort almost immediately. The rucksack settled into my shoulders like it was trying to sink me into the concrete. Each step pulled harder than the last. Tasks were stacked deliberately. Long carries into problem solving. Physical exhaustion followed by decisions that punished hesitation. Observers stood off to the side, silent, writing nothing, saying nothing. Halfway through, my breathing changed. Not panic, restriction. Each inhale came with a hollow, wheezing pull against the rubber, like air being dragged through a narrowed pipe. The mask pressed tight against my face, hard enough that I could feel my pulse in my cheeks. I slowed and checked the seal by touch alone. Tried again. The resistance stayed. Every breath sounded wrong inside my head. Light, thin, mechanical. My chest started to burn, not from effort, but from the fight to pull air that should have been there. My fingers went numb next. Not pain. Absence. I couldn't feel the strap in my hands anymore. I had to watch my fingers to make sure they were still wrapped around the nylon. Skin split where I couldn't feel it tearing. Protocol said, stop. I didn't. I adjusted instead. Slower steps. Longer breaths. One decision at a time. Quit now, and the narrative ends. Finish, and it gets harder to bury. My legs shook when I crossed the line. Not triumph. Not relief. Control. I didn't look at the observers. I already knew what mattered. Someone had been willing to let faulty equipment slide, and that told me everything. The investigation didn't break open all at once. It cracked slowly, like pressure finding a fault line that had been sealed for years. Finishing the evaluation removed the last excuse they had been holding on to. Once I didn't fail and didn't quit, the story they wanted to tell about me stopped working. The first person to speak up was an instructor I barely knew. He asked for a private conversation and closed the door carefully behind him, like sound itself could get him in trouble. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands locked behind his back, eyes fixed on the wall. "I've seen this go wrong before," he said quietly. More than once. He didn't generalize. He gave specifics, dates, names, drills that were pushed too far, recruits who lost consciousness, medical warnings that were ignored because stopping the evolution would have meant admitting something was wrong. He admitted he stayed quiet because the people who spoke up stopped getting good assignments. The next day, another instructor came forward. Then another. Each one told the story the same way. Carefully, precisely. Their accounts overlapped in ways that made denial impossible. Same drills. Same language. Same outcomes quietly reframed as personal failure instead of systemic risk. Then the recruits started talking. Some were still in the pipeline. Others had been removed months earlier for what the paperwork called lack of mental toughness. They described moments when their bodies failed and their voices were dismissed. Panic treated like weakness. Oxygen deprivation treated like attitude. Files that had gone nowhere resurfaced. Complaints marked resolved without action. Medical notes that contradicted official conclusions. Transfers approved days after incidents that should have shut training down entirely. The truth didn't need help. It lined itself up. Leadership could no longer pretend this was about one instructor losing his temper. The pattern was too clear, too consistent, too documented. The instructor who splashed water in my face was removed from duty pending review. He didn't argue. When I saw him later, his posture was smaller, the certainty gone from his eyes. Belief is hard to carry once it's dragged into the light. The senior enlisted leader who had protected him resigned before charges were filed. The announcement was brief and professional. No explanation. Everyone understood what it meant. Not everyone was punished. That mattered. Some instructors were retrained instead of removed. Some admitted they had confused endurance with readiness because that was how they had been taught. Some learned finally that authority does not excuse ignoring warning signs, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, because this was never about revenge or humiliation. It was about truth. And once enough people were willing to speak it out loud, silence lost the only power it ever had. The system didn't collapse. It was forced to look at itself. And in places like that, that reckoning changes everything. Change didn't come with announcements or speeches. It arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if the place itself was testing whether it was allowed to be different. Training shifted one decision at a time, small corrections made without drawing attention to themselves. New protocols appeared on clipboards and whiteboards, then started being enforced. Clear stop authority was written into drills instead of being implied away. Medical staff were given final say during high-risk evolutions, not treated like obstacles to toughness. Recovery time was built back into training, not stripped out to prove a point. At first, some instructors resisted, not openly. In subtle ways, a pause held too long before acknowledging a stop call. A glance towards senior leadership before adjusting a drill. Old habits don't disappear just because policy changes. But accountability had changed the air. People knew the margin for ignoring warning signs was gone. The results showed up fast. Injury rates dropped, not because training got easier, but because it got smarter. Recruits were still pushed hard, still exhausted, still expected to perform under stress, but fear stopped being the primary motivator. Performance improved. You could see it in the way recruits moved. Shoulders lower, breathing steadier, eyes focused instead of darting toward instructors. They weren't less disciplined. They were more present. I noticed the difference in the small moments. Walking past the pool one morning, I saw a recruit hesitate at the edge. Just for a second. He raised his hand and spoke, voice steady but careful, explaining what he was feeling instead of hiding it. The instructor listened. Not argued, not dismissed. The drill paused. Adjustments were made. The recruit completed the evolution safely and correctly. That would not have happened before. I spoke with recruits who finished the pipeline under the new standards. None of them called it soft. They called it fair. They said they were still tested to their limits, but they trusted that leaders wouldn't sacrifice them to prove toughness. That trust mattered. People who trust their leaders take risks for the right reasons. They perform better under pressure. They watch out for each other instead of only themselves. Some instructors admitted, quietly, that the changes forced them to rethink what strength actually looked like. Many of them had equated suffering with preparation because that was how they survived. Letting go of that belief wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Weeks passed. Then months. The facility settled into a new rhythm. Not weaker, not easier. More disciplined. People still failed. People still washed out, but when they did, the reasons were clear and defensible. No one disappeared quietly after a medical incident anymore. For me, the real measure of success wasn't in reports or statistics. It was standing on that same pool deck and feeling the difference. The tension was gone. The air felt lighter. Silence no longer meant fear. Sometimes I would watch a drill unfold and remember the morning water hit my face. Then I would watch a recruit speak up and be heard. And I would know the cost had been worth it. For a long time, I believed strength was measured by how much you could endure without speaking. How long you could keep moving, keep obeying, keep swallowing doubt because that was what the uniform demanded. I don't believe that anymore. Real strength is knowing when silence stops being discipline and starts becoming danger. It is recognizing when tradition turns into an excuse and when authority forgets that its first responsibility is not control, but care for the people under it. That day on the pool deck was never really about water thrown in my face. It was about the moment that followed. About whether the system would protect its image or the people standing inside it. about whether someone would finally say enough before a mistake turned into a death. I still think about the recruits who never spoke up before someone finally did, the ones who believed fear was the price of belonging. I think about how close we came to losing one of them for no reason that mattered, and how quietly it could have been explained away if no one had stepped in. Those thoughts don't come with anger. They come with responsibility. Leadership is not always loud. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is standing still, soaked and steady, refusing to step back when stepping back would be easier and safer for your own career. Because once you see where the line truly is, pretending you didn't see it is not strength at all. Subscribe to my channel, Hidden Sniper Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.